The day they buried the most feared wolf in history, 7 packs sent assassins to make sure he stayed dead. He did not. 3 years after the Ashvale massacre, the night an entire pack of 200 wolves was slaughtered in a single hour, no one had claimed responsibility. No one dared, because the wolves who survived that night did not survive long enough to speak. There was only one witness.
A boy.
13 years old. Found 3 miles from the massacre site, barefoot in the snow, his hands soaked in blood that was not his own. He was not trembling. He was not crying. He was walking, calm and deliberate, in the direction of the Ravenmoor Council Hall, the governing seat of all 7 wolf territories. His name was Dorian Voss. And when the council guards stopped him at the gates and demanded to know what had happened to the Ashvale pack, he looked up at them with eyes the color of cooling ash and said, "I happened." They locked him in a cell made of iron and mountain stone, the kind built to hold the oldest and most dangerous wolves in history. He stayed there for 11 years. When they finally opened that door, it was not because they had decided to release him. It was because something had started killing council members. 1 per week. No body. No scent. No trace. Just a single black feather left on an empty chair. They needed a monster to catch a monster. So they went to get Dorian Voss. The cell was so deep beneath the council hall that sunlight had never once touched its walls. The guards who escorted the council elder down the stone corridor did not speak. They had been chosen for this task specifically because they had never heard of Dorian Voss. Young recruits, new to the territory, unburdened by the stories that made older wolves find reasons to be elsewhere. Elder Orvin walked ahead of them, his silver-tipped cane clicking against the floor in a slow, measured rhythm. He was the oldest living wolf on the council. He had watched empires of fur and fong rise and crumble for over 3 centuries. He was not easily unsettled, but his hand tightened on that cane as they rounded the final corner. The cell, at the end of the corridor, was different from the others. The door was not iron. It was layered, iron, then silver, then a dark alloy no wolf could name, etched with suppression runes so old their origins had been lost to time. The kind of door that did not say, "This prisoner is locked in." It said, "Whatever is in here, we're not sure we can hold it." Orvin stopped a full 10 feet from the door. "Leave us," he said to the guards. The younger of the 2 hesitated. "Elder, protocol requires."
Leave us.
They left quickly. Their footsteps disappeared up the corridor. Then there was only silence and the low, almost inaudible sound coming from behind that door, a rhythmic, heavy sound, like something enormous breathing in perfect patience. Orvin straightened his spine. "Dorian Voss," he said, his voice carrying the full weight of council authority. "I am Elder Orvin of the Central Seat. I am here to make you an offer." The breathing did not change. 7 council members are dead. 1 per week for 7 weeks. Whoever or whatever is responsible is beyond the reach of our trackers, our enforcers, our most seasoned hunters. He paused. "We need someone who operates on a different level." Still nothing. Orvin pressed forward. "In exchange for your cooperation, the council is prepared to offer you conditional release, full restoration of You're afraid." The voice came from directly behind the door.
Low.
Unhurried. So close that Orvin instinctively took a step back before he could stop himself. "Not of you, specifically," Dorian Voss continued, his voice carrying no particular emotion, not anger, not bitterness, nothing that 11 years in isolation should have produced. Just observation. You're afraid of what's killing your people. You're afraid it's something you've never seen before. And you're afraid. A pause. That you might need me more than I need you. Orvin's jaw tightened. Will you help us or not? A long silence. Then the sound of a chain, slow, deliberate, being unwound from something. Not because it had been forced, because its owner had chosen to set it down. "Open the door, Elder." He was not what they expected. Dorian Voss stood in the center of his cell as the layered door swung open, and he looked, at first glance, almost unremarkable.
Tall, yes.
Built with the density of someone who had spent years in confined spaces training against his own resistance. Dark hair, cropped close. No beard, which struck Orvin as oddly deliberate for a man who had been in a cell for 11 years. But it was the eyes. They were the same ash gray that the old guard reports had described from the night of the massacre. The color of a fire that had burned everything it could find and was now simply waiting for more fuel. They swept the corridor with a single, practiced scan, cataloging exits, threats, distances, before settling on Orvin with an expression that was not hostility. It was evaluation. 7 dead, Dorian said, stepping through the door as though he were leaving a room he had chosen to be in. 1 per week. Black feather. No scent signature. He reached up and rolled his right shoulder, the motion of a man reclaiming his own body after years of stillness. It's not a wolf. Orvin blinked. We haven't told you the details of the feather. Dorian turned to face him fully. Wolves don't leave signatures. We leave nothing, or we leave everything. A feather is a message. Deliberate. Theatrical. Whatever is killing your council members wants you to know it's coming before it arrives. He paused. It wants you afraid. That means it's feeding on something. Feeding on. Fear has a frequency. Certain things can sense it, amplify it, use it. His gaze did not waver. You don't have a wolf problem, Elder. You have something older. The silence in the corridor stretched. Orvin had come down here believing he was releasing a weapon he could point and control. He was beginning to revise that assessment with some urgency. What do you need? He finally asked. Dorian Voss looked down the corridor toward the stairs, toward the first daylight he had seen in 11 years. Access to the death sites. The Council's full record of territorial agreements going back 2 centuries. And one other thing. Name it. The file on the Ashvale massacre. He began walking toward the stairs without waiting for an answer. The real one, not the version you sealed. Behind him, Elder Orvin stood very still, because there was no official record of a sealed file, which meant Dorian Voss, locked in a cell for 11 years with no outside contact, should not have known one existed. He walked up toward the light anyway, his footsteps echoing off the stone, steady and unhurried, like a man who had already decided how the story ended and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. The first death site was a townhouse in the Irongate district, the residential quarter where senior council members kept their private residences. The wolf who had lived there, Senior Adjudicator Fennick, 63 years in council service, had vanished from a locked room on the 3rd floor. The window had been sealed from the inside. The door had been bolted. The suppression wards on the building were among the strongest in the territory. He was simply gone, except for the feather on his reading chair. And the smell. Dorian crouched in the center of the room and breathed in slowly, cataloging. The council's forensic team had swept the space twice and found nothing beyond Fennick's own scent signature. Standard procedure. Standard result. But Dorian was not using standard procedure. He was using the part of himself the council had spent 11 years trying to suppress, the deep, atavistic sensory capacity that came not from his wolf half, but from something the council had no clean category for. The thing that had let a 13-year-old boy walk out of a massacre with someone else's blood on his hands and no explanation that fit inside the boundaries of what wolves were supposed to be able to do. He found it in the corner behind the bookcase. Not a scent, an absence. A hollow in the room's atmospheric signature, as if something had passed through this space that did not belong to the physical world in the way that bodies belong to it. Something that had weight and presence and intention, but no biological trace. He had encountered this before. Once. Long ago. In the hours before the Ashvale massacre. He stood up slowly. The other 6 sites, he said to the council liaison standing in the doorway, A young enforcer named Rook who had been assigned to shadow him and who had been failing to look calm about it for the past hour. Were any of them located along the old territorial boundary lines? Rook checked his notes.
Frowned. 3 of them, yes.
How did you? The boundary lines are not just geographic markers. Dorian moved to the window and looked out at the city below. The original 7 pack territories were established on top of something that already existed. Older lines. Older agreements. He watched a cart move through the street below, completely ordinary, completely unaware. Someone has found the old map, and they're using it to open doors that were nailed shut for a reason. The room was very quiet. What kind of doors? Rook asked, with the tone of a man who genuinely hoped the answer would be metaphorical. Dorian turned from the window. His ash-gray eyes held no comfort. The kind that things come through, he said. From the other side of what we are. There is a law older than any council decree, older than pack hierarchy, older than the first wolf that ever raised its head and decided it ruled the night. It is not written anywhere, but every wolf feels it, buried somewhere beneath the instinct and the bone. Do not dig beneath the old boundaries. Someone had not only dug, they had knocked, and something had answered. The council's archive room occupied the entire sublevel of the hall's east wing, a vast, climate-regulated vault of ledgers, territorial maps, treaty scrolls, and sealed records spanning nearly 4 centuries of wolf governance. It smelled of old paper, iron clasps, and the particular dusty authority of information that very few people had ever been permitted to see. Dorian moved through it like a man who knew exactly what he was looking for, which was unsettling to Archivist Crane, who had spent 30 years ensuring that no one could navigate this space without her assistance. She followed 3 steps behind him, her mouth a thin line of professional displeasure. The pre-council records are in the restricted section, she said. Your clearance does not extend. Elder Orvin gave me full access. Full council access. The pre-council materials predate council jurisdiction and are governed by a separate. He stopped at a particular shelf, the 3rd from the back, bottom row, and pulled out a ledger so old its leather cover had gone the color of dark earth. He did not check the label. He simply knew it. Crane stopped speaking. How did you know that was there? She said. It was not quite a question. Dorian opened the ledger. The pages were written in a script that predated the standardized wolf tongue by at least 2 centuries. Dense, angular characters that most living wolves couldn't read without a translation key. He read it without one. The Ashvale territory, he said, scanning pages with the quick, efficient focus of someone revisiting familiar material. Before it was Ashvale, what was it called? Crane was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had dropped. In the pre-council records, that area is listed as Valedrith. The Hollow Reach. He translated without looking up. And the pack that originally held it? Another pause. Longer this time. There is no pack name given, Crane said. The record just refers to them as the first claimants. Because they didn't claim the territory. Dorian closed the ledger. They guarded it. There's a difference. He turned to face her. What happened to them? Crane's expression had shifted from professional displeasure to something more complicated. Something that looked, around the edges, like old guilt. They were absorbed, she said carefully. In the second consolidation, their land was divided among 3 founding packs. Their people were integrated. Their people were erased, Dorian said, without heat. Just fact. Their name, their history, their purpose. He set the ledger on the reading table. And the thing they were guarding, what happened to that? Crane said nothing. The seals, he said. The boundary wards on the old Valedrith lines. When the territory was divided, who maintained them? More silence. The kind that answered. Dorian nodded slowly, as though she had spoken. Nobody, he said. For 200 years. Nobody. He looked back at the shelf, at 4 centuries of careful governance and territorial law and political architecture, all of it built over a foundation that no one had checked in 2 centuries. "The thing killing your council members is not here for revenge," he said. "It's not making a political statement. It doesn't care about pack hierarchy or council authority."
He looked at Crane.
"It's been sealed beneath those boundary lines since before wolves organized themselves into governments. And now the seals are degraded, and it's doing what it always does when a seal breaks." "What is that?" Crane asked, very quietly. "Testing the surface. Finding the cracks." He picked up the old ledger again, measuring how long before it can come through fully. The archive was cold, as archive rooms always are. But Crane pulled her coat a little tighter, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. "The first claimants," she said. "Their records were sealed, not destroyed. We still have them." Dorian looked at her. "I know," he said. She stared at him. "You can't possibly. 11 years in a cell with no outside contact is a very long time to think," he said. "Bring me the Vaildrith records." He sat down at the reading table, the old ledger open in front of him, and did not look up again. Crane stood still for another moment, caught between procedure and the creeping, unignorable sense that the man sitting in front of her was the only reason any of them were going to survive the next 30 days. She went to get the records. The second thing Dorian needed was harder to obtain than archive access.
He needed to speak to a dead man.
Not metaphorically. Not through records or testimony or the second-hand accounts of witnesses. He needed to stand in the space where Senior Adjudicator Fennec had last existed and use a method of retrieval that the Council had classified as forbidden, not because it was dangerous, though it was, but because it confirmed things about the nature of wolves that the Council's founding charters had very deliberately chosen not to confirm. He did it at 2 a.m, when Rook had finally surrendered to exhaustion and fallen asleep against the wall in the corridor outside, and the house was as close to empty as it was going to get. He sat in Fennec's reading chair and closed his eyes and went looking. The space between what had happened and what remained was thin in rooms where significant things had occurred. Wolves didn't have a clean name for what Dorian was doing. The Council's official position was that it didn't exist, but the first claimants had called it threadwalking. Moving through the residue of events that had soaked into a space and left impressions in the atmospheric fabric that something sufficiently attuned could read like text. He found Fennec in the last 30 seconds before the old wolf disappeared. The impression was fragmented, strong at the edges, distorted at the center, as if something had deliberately disrupted the clarity of the moment before it could crystallize into a readable memory. That itself was information. Whatever had taken Fennec had known about threadwalking, had taken precautions against it, but it had missed one thing. In the distortion, in the very center where the disruption was strongest, there was a sound. Just 2 seconds of it. Muffled, compressed, almost unidentifiable. A voice. Not Fennec's. Not a wolf's voice. Something that had learned to shape language by observing it from the outside for a very long time. Something that had learned the mechanics of speech without ever needing it, the way a person might learn to mimic a language they would never need to use. And the 2 words it had said, in the moment before Fennec vanished, were not a threat. They were a name. Dorian opened his eyes. Rook appeared in the doorway, apparently not as asleep as advertised, his hand already moving toward the weapon at his hip. "What happened?"
"You went," he stopped.
Looked at Dorian's face. "What did you find?" Dorian stood up from the reading chair.
"It knows my name," he said.
The silence that followed was the kind that rearranges the shape of a situation entirely. "That's..." Rook started. "Not a coincidence." Dorian moved to the window. Outside, the Irongate district was quiet and dark and deeply ordinary. "It's not just killing council members. It's clearing a path." He watched the empty street. "To me..." Rook was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular bravery of someone who had decided that fear was not a productive use of his current circumstances. "Why you?" Dorian's reflection looked back at him from the dark glass. Ash-gray eyes. Patient. Calculating. Already several moves ahead in a game that everyone else was still learning the rules of. Because I'm the only one who knows how to put the seals back, he said. He did not explain how he knew that. He did not explain the other thing. The thing the voice had said that was not his name, the second word that had come after it, spoken with the particular weight of something that had been waiting a very long time to say it. He would deal with that part alone. He always had. The first claimants did not choose their territory. They were placed there by something older than pack law and older than wolves and older, some of the most ancient records suggested with careful, reluctant implication, than the world as wolves understood it. They were placed there because something had to be. And for 200 years after the council erased them, nothing was. The Veildrith records were kept in a box. Not a vault, not a sealed archive drawer, not even a locked chest. A plain wooden box, the kind used for administrative overflow, labeled in the dry cataloging script of some long-dead archivist as Miscellaneous Preconsolidation, Region 7. Crane had found it in the back of a storage shelf behind 3 centuries of tax ledgers, apparently unmoved since the day someone had decided it was not important enough to warrant proper housing. Dorian sat with the box for 6 hours. What he found inside rearranged everything. The first claimants, the Veildrith wolves, had not been guardians in the sense that the word implied voluntary service. They had been something more structural than that. Something more necessary. They were the living anchor points of a containment system so old that its original architects were not identified anywhere in the records, referred to only as those who came before the first shift. The boundary lines that the council had later repurposed as territorial markers were not territorial markers at all. They were a cage. And the thing in the cage had a name. In the Veildrith records, it was written in a script so old it barely shared alphabet with the language Dorian was reading, but it translated, roughly, to something that was less a name and more a description. The unmade. A thing that existed in the space between what wolves were before they became wolves and what they had become after. Something that had been present at the first shift, the original transformation, the moment the oldest wolves believed was the source point of their entire species, and had been caught in the transition. Neither fully of the physical world, nor entirely outside it. Stranded in the boundary between. For centuries, the first claimants had maintained the seals not to imprison it. Nothing that old, nothing that structurally integral to the nature of shifters, could be truly imprisoned. They maintained the seals to prevent it from pulling the boundary itself down entirely. Because if the unmade fully crossed from its space into the physical world, it would not arrive alone. It would arrive as a door, and everything on its side of the threshold would follow it through. Dorian closed the last folder and sat with the specific, clarifying silence that comes from understanding a situation completely. The council thought 7 dead members was a crisis. They did not yet understand that 7 dead members was a demonstration. The unmade was not killing them because it wanted them dead. It was killing them because each death, conducted along the old Veildrith lines, was a structural action, the equivalent of removing a load-bearing beam. Each council member who died at a site along the ancient boundary had, in life, carried a fragment of the old territorial authority that had replaced the original seal system. They had not known it. The council had never told them, because the council had buried the Veildrith records in a miscellaneous box and forgotten about it. But the unmade had not forgotten. It was dismantling the replacement system piece by piece, not out of malice, but out of purpose. Out of the same deep, structural intention that had oriented it for 2 centuries of waiting behind a degraded seal. It wanted to come through, and it was doing it carefully, methodically, with the patience of something that did not experience time the way bodies experienced it. Dorian looked at the 7 names on the death list. 7 council members. 7 sites along the boundary lines. 7 structural removals from a system that had 13 load-bearing points total. 6 more. He had time. Not much of it, but enough. He stood up, put the Veildrith records back in their plain wooden box, and went to find Elder Orvin. The meeting was brief. Dorian laid it out without ceremony, what the unmade was, what it was doing, What would happen if the remaining 6 Boundary Site council members were not moved off the old Veildrith lines before the next kill? Orvin listened without interrupting. His face, over the course of 5 minutes, made a journey from authoritative composure through calculated skepticism and arrived, quietly, at the particular expression of a very old wolf who has just been told something he had suspected for decades and spent those decades working very hard not to confirm.
You knew, Dorian said.
It was not an accusation, just another piece of the picture, clicking into place. Orvin set down his cane. A small gesture, but significant, removing the symbol of authority between them. An admission. I knew the old records were important, he said carefully. I did not know the specifics. We were told, when I was inducted into the council, that the pre-consolidation materials were sensitive for political reasons. The suppression of the first claimant's culture during the consolidation was not the council's most ethical chapter. That's a careful way to describe erasing an entire people whose entire function was preventing something catastrophic from entering the physical world. Orvin's jaw was tight.
Yes,
it is. Silence. Move the 6, Dorian said. Tonight. Out of their current residences. Somewhere with no connection to the old boundary lines. I'll give you a map of the safe zones. He paused. And I need the council to give me something in return. Name it.
Acknowledgement, Dorian said.
Official, public, on the record. That the first claimants existed. What they were. What the council did to them. He met the old wolf's eyes. Before I reseal the boundary. Because I'm not sealing it the same way it was sealed last time. The old method required a living anchor. A Veildrith wolf. Orvin was very still. The first claimants are gone. They were absorbed 2 centuries ago. Their bloodline is not entirely gone. Another silence. A different shape than the ones before it. The Ash Vale massacre, Orvin said slowly. Dorian said nothing. The pack the council assigned to the old Veildrith territory 3 generations ago. Orvin's voice had gone very quiet. We had them positioned along the boundary lines without knowing, without telling them, what those lines were. They were not killed by an outside attacker. Still nothing from Dorian. The Unmade found them. Orvin's face had aged 10 years in 30 seconds. It began testing the seals, and the Ash Vale wolves felt it, because they had Veildrith blood, diluted but present, enough to feel what was coming, and no one had ever told them what they were carrying or what to do with it. And when it pressed on the seals, they broke, Dorian said.
Quiet. Flat.
Final. From the inside. From the strain of something they didn't understand, hitting a heritage they didn't know they had. He looked at his hands. 200 wolves. Most of them dead before they understood what was happening. And you survived because my strain was stronger. He looked up. And because I had 11 years in a cell to figure out what I was. The weight of 200 dead wolves sat in the room between them. Orvin closed his eyes. When he opened them, there was something in them that might, in a younger wolf, have been called remorse. In someone as old as he was, it simply looked like the final settling of a very long account. The acknowledgement, he said. You'll have it, whatever form you need. Dorian nodded once. Then I'll reseal the boundary. He picked up his coat. And then, he said, we talk about what happened to the rest of the Ash Vale survivors. He left the room. Behind him, Elder Orvin sat alone in the silence of several centuries of consequences and did not call him back.